that there are nature spirits and so on. Then I was even more intrigued to read the story of Findhorn, where they communed with these different nature spirits and so on, and through that communion were able to make things grow bigger. And so also with everything that we do, if we use it, if we draw on it, then we draw the divine flow through it. But what has happened in recent centuries is that because we have lost touch with that truth, that there are nature spirits, that there is a power flowing through nature, a divine power ultimately, not just nature spirits who are only instruments, as you and I are, for a much greater power. That because of that, this power is leaving. Just as a spring dries up if you don't use it, so also that power begins to leave this planet if you don't call on it. And so I thought it would be fun, instructive, inspiring, helpful, all sorts of things, if we would have these different channels and call them names like clouds and tree and river and so on, to sort of make people think of where we are. But then it would be the duty of the people who are in this particular channel to try to draw, especially through those instruments, the divine power. In other words, if you are a part of the tree channel, then that means that every time you see a tree, you try to draw from that tree God's expression to the world. And by your doing that, you will begin each of us will begin in our little way to activate nature, to make it a more living thing, where it's becoming a dead thing because we're killing it. This is what we did when we went to Egypt. We went to the different temples, and by tuning into the old vibrations, we're trying also to reactivate those old vibrations, which have been allowed to become clogged up and stagnant and dead. But now, with that reactivation, more and more, I believe that power is being brought into the world. So we can do that, and a natural thing to do here in the woods is to have to concentrate on trees, rivers, sky, clouds, grass, whatever, natural forms. How does that sound to you? Sounds rather fun, doesn't it? I mean, it should be fun as well as something serious, and this could be something fun, so that you can tell your friends when you go home, and say it seriously if you feel to say it seriously, and say it laughingly if you feel to say it laughingly, and each will have its own level of validity. Well, what I wanted to do in tying it in with our topic this morning is to point out that we need to open our own channels too. And that the way that we choose to call on the divine determines how, which channel will be open. It's the same energy, the energy that comes in through the window of a stained glass window in a church. It'll be the same sunlight pouring through, but it'll take on different colors according to the pane of glass that it's penetrating. And so the laws of energy, the laws of genius, the laws of all great skills, all of them basically are the same thing. You will notice that people who have a talent in one sphere can usually do have talent in many spheres, or can develop that talent. For example, a person who, let's say, is a very good pianist, and then gets polio, and I know a case like that, which is why I'm thinking of it. This person got polio and couldn't play anymore. So he directed it into writing poetry, and he wrote very well. It was the same energy rechanneled. Sometimes you need to open up that channel, but the first and most important thing is that you have the energy flow. And without that energy, and without understanding how the energy works, you won't be able to make this principle work well. In other words, what would make you a good healer, what would make it possible for you to heal yourself as well as others, is essentially not different from what would make you a good writer, or a good athlete, or a good business administrator, or good at anything that you try to do. It's all from the same source and then channeled in different ways. The only qualification there is that probably it will be that if you are particularly good at one thing or another, this isn't your first time trying it. Usually we develop and have a desire to manifest skills that we have worked on over many incarnations. And usually it takes many incarnations to become a Mozart or a Beethoven or a Leonardo or George Washington or anybody who's really outstanding in his sphere. Usually it takes a long time to be able to open up that channel so that finally that energy can flow particularly well there. So there are the two things. One, the energy. Two, the opening of the channel. The opening of the channel, however, need not take many incarnations. I remember one time saying to Master, to Yogananda, that there was a habit I was trying to overcome, and I was saying that it's difficult to overcome it. And he said, well, habits can be overcome in a day. It only takes concentration of the mind. That's all a habit is in the first place, is a concentration of the mind. And if you can get to the source of it and change that concentration, then you can change it in a day. And he proved that sometimes. You remember that story where he was coming across on the boat and not having his mind on the possibility of seasickness jumped on him unawares, and he was ill. And then he said, I command my subconscious to accept the new habit of not being seasick, and from then on he had no trouble. But he did it with a lot of strength. He did it with a lot of energy. He put it one foot forward like this, and he raised a hand, and he made this strong affirmation. And if you will do anything with strong affirmation, strong willpower, strong energy, you will find that in fact you don't have to wait a long time to be good at anything that you choose to do. It's a matter of wanting to do that, to express it in that particular way. Let us then talk not so much about healing at first, as about the way this principle works that can be used by anybody in any direction. Let us talk about how to become a genius. Let us talk about how to succeed. Let us talk about how to draw that energy and how to open the channel. And only then need we consider this more specific application of this principle. But if we consider the specific application first, we really won't understand the principle. The first thing is energy. Master said, he gave this as a precept, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. You've noticed this in your life, no doubt, many times. It's a principle on which he based his whole system of energization exercises. And those of you who don't practice them regularly or don't know them would do very well to learn them and practice them regularly, because they have a tremendous effect, much more far-reaching than only the effect on your body, although that is an important one too. But I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about as far as the body is concerned. Years ago, I was busy trying to raise the money to build Ananda. And I was giving classes every night in a different city and had lots of students coming, and as a result of all of those class fees, we were able to build the retreat, buy the land there, and get Ananda started. Well, it was a very difficult period for me. I had to work very hard to meet the bills. It wasn't so much that I needed to do it quickly as that the pressures had built up in such a way that I had no control over them. I had to meet those bills. Well, one day I was driving across San Francisco to give a class, and suddenly I felt this cold come on me. You know how sometimes a cold can seize you so quickly that from one breath to the next, suddenly I felt all runny nose and just headachy and horrible. And I thought, my gosh, I just can't afford to be sick now. I'm too busy. And so I said, get out, like that. And it got out. Between that breath and the next, it was gone. It didn't come back. But what I did was really also, at that very moment, put a lot of energy into that thought. And the energy which I had developed over practicing the energization exercises for years, that energy I was able to direct immediately in this way. Now, that's something that, in fact, I'm by no means unique in. I merely knew what I was doing, but we all use these principles in one way or another unconsciously. I read in the Reader's Digest, in fact, that women very often, mothers, if the husband is ill and the children can't go to school, that very often the mothers don't get ill, simply because they don't have time to get ill. And after the children are back in school and the husband's back at work, then the mother gets ill. It shows the extent to which willpower is the determining factor. Doctors all know this. Nurses all know this. How people in hospitals who have no reason to die will die if they've lost the will to live. And people with everything against them will live and thrive if they have the desire to become well. A friend of mine in a polio clinic told me he was a physiotherapist, and he used to work their limbs and try to help them to overcome their paralysis. He said that he had discovered that the poor patients got well much more frequently than the well-to-do patients. And the reason simply was that the poor patients couldn't afford to be there and had to get out if they possibly could, where the well-to-do patients could afford to relax and they stayed there long enough for the paralysis to become a habit. It's a very interesting fact. Some woman at Mount Washington, she was not a nun, she was there hired as a cook, but she was a big, strapping lady and very active, very athletic, and very strong. And she told me she'd had polio once. Well, a person of that physique and temperament to face the thought of paralysis all her life must have been particularly burdensome. And she just wouldn't have anything to do with it. And so she would wait until the nurses were out of the room, and she would just sort of roll herself like this on the bed till she'd fall on the floor, and she'd crawl over against a wall and try to push herself up the wall and do anything she could to make these useless legs work. And after a while, the miracle occurred, and she completely overcame that paralysis that she thought was going to be her lot for life. Or I should say everyone else thought it was going to be her lot for life. Willpower is really the determining factor. And this ties in with another important point that I touched on earlier, that the energy that we draw into our bodies is not just our own energy being awakened. That's a part of it. There's a lot of energy that you have that is simply being blocked. But there's also a divine energy that surrounds your body that can be drawn on at will. I've had a very sort of intriguing thought about the whole question of energy. I mean, fossil fuels, that kind of energy. The kind of energy that runs our turbines and ships and cities and so on. We are told now by a lot of scientists that because our cheap fuel, the oil in the ground, is limited in supply, that inevitably we are going to have to go back to an age of greater simplicity like the medieval times when they didn't have that kind of energy. That the whole explanation for our 20th century advancement, scientifically and so on, is cheap fossil fuels. Well, here's the intriguing alternative to that thought. Do we have the energy because we found the fuels, or did we find the fuels because we have suddenly a consciousness of energy? According to the Indian scriptures, the ages go in cycles, and that there are times when man becomes more aware of higher realities and times when he becomes less aware. And according to Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, he explained that we are in an upward cycle, this total cycle lasting 24,000 years, that the lowest point was 500 AD, and that now we have come into the next age, no longer the dark age, but the age of Dwapara, or that age in which people become aware of matter as energy. Now, we are aware of that, aren't we? I mean, it wasn't fossil fuels that gave Einstein the inspiration to say that matter is energy. That's a separate thing altogether from the fact that we've got energy to use. We are, in fact, conscious of energy. We're conscious that the world is made of energy. We're conscious that energy is the reality behind matter. We're conscious that the world is no longer just a solid thing, but that it's really sort of great rivers of energy, different vibrations, and so on. Our consciousness has changed. Now, when your consciousness is ready, that's when you see truths, isn't it? You can tell, well, I mean, people were seeing mold on breads for centuries, but when they were ready for it, they saw penicillin. And this has been the truth of every discovery, that we make the discovery when we're ready to see it there. In fact, oil was discovered in where I was born, outside Ploiești, Romania. And it was discovered there because it was seeping out of the ground. It was seeping out of the ground long before that, but people didn't know what to do with it. They just avoided that horrible stink. When people have the consciousness of energy, they find it. And because of that, I'm perfectly convinced that we're simply going to discover other sources of energy. In fact, the whole world is energy. We draw on that energy all the time. Why shouldn't we find many, many other ways of drawing on it? I think that the fossil fuels are a very gross form of energy conversion, and that we will be able to tap into it in a much more direct way, so that the age that we're coming to will be, it will seem that this age, by comparison with the next century, that this age is primitive. We're coming into a golden age comparatively. And I'm not the only one making that claim. Everybody who knows the spiritual teaching, everybody who's studied human nature and psychic law, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying that we're headed for a great crash and a great Holocaust, but that it is to clear the ground for a beautiful age such as history has not shown us. So anyway, this energy that we can draw on is all around us. And whenever we will something, then we can do it. I read a book by a man called M.O. Garton, who recommends fasting as a very therapeutic thing. And of course, we know he's right. And he mentioned an interesting story. He said when he was on a fast years before, he had reached the 5th day of his fast, I guess, when he read in the papers about a town in South America that had been cut off, whether by hurricanes or whatever, they'd been cut off from delivery of shipments of food that they were relying on, and that for 3 days they had been without food. When the ship arrived, the newspaper said there were riots, people so desperate, and people fainting in the streets and desperately clamoring to and clawing their way to get this food before they died. 3 days. And he said, but I was on my 5th day of a fast, and I had probably eaten less than they'd probably had something, and I felt great. It was so when you put willpower out, you will find that you can draw much more of anything. When you feel right about something, then you will find that everything flows wonderfully. But when you don't feel right about things, then somehow you don't have the will for it, your heart isn't in it, suddenly you find you don't have the strength to do it. When there's something that you want to do, just an example that I've often used because it's something we can all relate to, is supposing you have a party and there's a high stack of dishes in the sink, late at night, people don't go home until 2 in the morning, and you've got to get up early and go to work, and you look at those dishes and you think, oh my God, tomorrow. But you didn't get more than 3 hours of sleep, and you just sort of drag yourself groggily through the day, and you finally sort of lurch back into the house, and you see those dishes there, and the first thing you think is, my God, I just can't. And you collapse on a bed, just totally exhausted. The mere sight of those dishes is enough to reaffirm your exhaustion. And then the phone rings. And somebody that you haven't, a dear friend of yours that you haven't heard from in years, is in town for the first time and says, how about getting together? And where did all that energy come from? I mean, you can stay up late at night and not even think about being tired, because suddenly this is something you want. The energy that you can draw into your body, it's been shown, like this M.O. Garton. He was able to draw that energy into his body by the fact that he wanted to have the energy there. He felt good. He believed in it. And those other people didn't have any energy because they felt that they weren't supposed to have it. They looked on themselves as sort of South American Fords or something, that you stick a little bit of fuel in it, it runs as long as the gasoline is there, and as soon as the gasoline's gone, you run out. But we're not like a fuel car in every way. We are to some extent. But Yogananda described us more as a battery, which, if the battery runs down, then you can't recharge it by filling it with water. Water is needed to keep it going, but the recharging of the battery comes from another source. Our recharging of this physical battery, this electromagnetic motor that we live in, and that's really what it is, our recharging of that comes from constant awareness and attunement with and drawing from the divine source. Now, this is an important point to consider on every level, because remember I said that the energy that we are talking about when we refer to the energization exercises, for example, is an energy that can be used in many, many different ways. In fact, it's it's the energy level that determines the difference between genius and mediocrity. It's almost as simple as that. Of course, it's not quite as simple as that, but that's the start of it. You will never notice a person of low energy being able to produce great works. You will find that people who do great things are always, but always, people of extraordinary energy. And people of extraordinary energy may not be geniuses, but somehow they're able to make things happen, and usually in extraordinary ways. Genius is the starting point of success in every field. And the energy, just as the energy that it takes to digest your food is the same energy that it takes to think with, you can try that by trying to talk deep philosophy after a huge meal. I remember years ago, before I came onto the path and learned a little bit of moderation in diet, our Christmas banquets, dinners at my parents' home, how we would just sort of stagger into the living room afterwards and collapse on the couch. And if anybody had challenged me to a game of chess or something at that time, I would have just not been able to think about it, because all the energy from the brain would be down here. It's the same energy that goes to keep your body strong, or goes to make your body well, or goes to produce a great play, or to bring you into deep meditation. All of this is the same. And so, you read in books by and about great composers, great artists, geniuses, and so on, you read that their genius sort of, I'm not sure of exactly the meaning, but basically it's tied to the idea of being able to be inspired from above, to draw your inspiration from a higher source. My genius, people talk about as if it were something being given to them. And in fact, that's really sort of the way it works. I've noticed, for instance, if I have to give a talk, that there is someone, and I consider it to be Master, that well, just give me the topic for the day or the approach for the day, and I don't even have to ask for it. It will be maybe while I'm just sipping a cup of tea or whatever, just getting ready to come over, and suddenly here's a new approach, and it's one I've never given before, and it just is the right one for that day and that crowd. And it always seems to work. This kind of inspiration, these people say that you can't draw on it at will. Most of the, or many, I should say, of the people who are considered authorities, I would say most of the authoritative statements that I have read on this subject are to the effect that you don't have any control over it. That when it chooses to come to you, it will. Well, that's not true. You can draw on it at will. It is there to be attracted by the power of your own will and your own magnetism. To use the simplest illustration, when you introduce an electric current into a wire, it generates a magnetic field. And that magnetic field is what you're generating when you send out a strong thought. You're sending energy with that thought. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy, and that will is creating a flow of energy. The energy creates a magnetic field, and the magnetic field draws to you. You can find that you don't have to wait incarnations to be able to do things well. You don't have to wait for the right opportunities to create those opportunities. The statement of Einstein that he wrote in Science was, imagination is more important than knowledge. You don't need to know a lot of things. If you have the imagination, if you have the inspiration, you can accomplish just about anything you want to accomplish. And so by your willpower, you can say, I will do it. Now there are two aspects to will. And in fact, if we don't understand this, we're likely to use the very word willpower wrongly. Because too often, people, when they try to will something, say, I'm going to do it, and they get all tense. And what are they really doing when they're getting tense? It's pushing on opposite sides of a door, and the door doesn't move. Do you remember that really interesting story? I think it's interesting in the path of how I passed that Greek exam. I hadn't studied the course at all, hardly at all. I knew in a paragraph maybe two words like and the. And when the professor said that when he was trying to prepare us for the exam, he said, well, of course, there are some people in this course who might as well not even come to the exam. And everybody looked at me and laughed. But I was determined to pass it, and I just was going to sit down and study it, and I sat down a week before, picked up the book and looked at it, and it was I just didn't feel in the mood for it. It was boring. I put it down. Next day, same story. Next day, same story. Until finally, it was the night before the exam. And I thought, my God, I'm going to pass this exam, but how? How? And then I suddenly hit, in the desperation of the moment, on an inspiration that I think is really worth sharing with people. I told myself, I'm a Greek. And in that thought of being a Greek, suddenly I had removed what is the major barrier to learning anything. The thought that you can't learn it. The thought that it's foreign to you. The thought that you don't know it yet, you don't know it already, and so it's going to be difficult to absorb it. I got rid of all those thoughts with that simple little affirmation, I'm a Greek. It was just then a matter of sort of getting in tune with my own language, and even in a psychic way, attuning myself with what it means to think like a Greek and therefore speak like a Greek. And surprisingly, you'll find it does work that way. If you go to Mexico, for example, and feel that you're a Mexican, you'll find that not only are you removing the barriers to being able to speak the language, but also you will be putting yourself in tune with that kind of flow from the divine that has made a few people in this world speak Spanish. And it really works to a surprising degree. I've made it work in different countries as I've traveled and picked up the language. For instance, I was in Bali for 2 weeks, and I soon discovered what a hopeless position I was in, because the people there didn't know any English at all. I'd ask them for a glass of water and they'd bring me a loaf of bread. And one time I was up on a high mountain, 7,000 feet high, Gunung Agung, I think it's called. And it was very cold, and I asked for a blanket, and they brought me a glass of water, and it was really sort of a desperate situation. So I decided I had to learn to speak Indonesian. Do you know, by the end of 2 weeks, I had a vocabulary of 600 words, and I was able to carry on conversations very easily. And all of this simply by that thought that while I'm here, I'm Balinese. Thank you, ma'am. In anything that you do, it's a principle. It's not one person can do it, another one can't do it. We can all do it, and all do it with equal ease if we will apply the same principles. What basically are we saying here? That willpower means, okay, let me use another illustration. Supposing you're trying to thread a needle. You're not going to say, I'm going to get this thing through, it kills me. It won't work, will it? The eye of the needle is too small. And it's too sensitive an operation to come in like a football player. You've got to go very sensitively and attune yourself to what you're doing. That's sort of the message in that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, isn't it? That you can't force a machine, you've got to go with the laws of the machine. You can't force anything in this world, you've got to go with the way it actually works. And that means that your willpower must be harnessed to whatever flow you're trying to generate. It'll be a different kind of flow if you're going to play football from the kind of flow that if you're trying to thread a needle and sew a button on a shirt. But it won't be a different energy. It'll be a different flow of that energy, and you have to attune yourself to that flow, and then once you've got that, then you can apply willpower and really make it work. So attunement is a very important part of this. In fact, here's an intriguing thought. Last Thursday, I talked about the way that all of delusion is sort of an expression outward and then inward, and it all ties in with the breath. I don't know, this is a little, it won't be easy to grasp. Try to tune into what I'm saying, because I'm not going to make a long lecture out of it. But just as if you want to control a horse, you've got to go with it for a while. And then you can bring it under control if it's run away. And then bring it back to the stable. Similarly, what is really happening in the involvement in delusion is that there is an upward rising energy in the spine. An upward rising and a downward flowing, an expansion and contraction. And everything that we do is involved in that kind of rhythm. Now, and this is where Hong Sao and Kriya are extraordinary sciences, if you can understand that everything begins with this flow in yourself, that whatever happens out there is strictly a reflection of what's going on here. It all begins with your own reaction. And if you can deliberately get a hold of that reactive process by concentrating and intensifying the flow of energy in the spine, instead of having your center out there thinking that it's in that thing that you're enjoying, if you can deliberately get a control over this reactive process of flow in the Ira and Pingala nerve channels, then you will find that you get to the point where you can control anything in your life. And that's very subtle. Meditate on it, and those of you who don't know yoga, forget that I said it perhaps, because it may be a little bit too abstruse. But nevertheless, it's a fascinating point to dwell upon, that this is how you can control your destiny absolutely, by getting control over the energies in your own spine. This is how you can free yourself from karma and from all the ins and outs and ups and downs of the world. You finally reach the point where you can go through this world and nothing can ever touch you again. This is the state of Jivan Mukta, or inner divine freedom. Now, to go back to this whole thing, the first thing then is to generate the willpower. The second thing is to control the willpower and to tune it to whatever it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to heal somebody, you're trying to send a very subtle kind of energy. You can't just sort of grab him by the neck and shake him. You might choke him. You have to tune into this much more subtle thing. And I think that this is the kind of age that we're coming into in the next century, where the ways that doctors treat people today will seem almost like medicine men by comparison, when they realize that it isn't just those pills. Do you know that the pills that they test in the Federal Drug Administration before they accept it as a worthwhile pill to put on the market, they have a control of just a placebo that has no power at all. And they have found that if the placebo, I forget the exact statistics, but it's something like this, that if the pill which they finally accept as a worthwhile thing to put on the market, if this pill is 70% effective, then they figure it's a good thing to release. But do you know that the placebos are 60% effective? It's really the mind that does so much of it, and the mind through the agency of the flow of energy. This is the most important part of all. And we're coming into an age when people begin to realize that the energy is the real healer. And all these pills and outward things are not nearly so important as this other. Well, for example, here are the two alternatives, aren't they? One, to kill the disease. The other, to strengthen the organism so it won't be subject to the disease. Which is better? Obviously to strengthen the organism, because in the process of killing the disease, if that's your approach, you're going to be killing more than the disease. You may be killing, for example, helpful bacteria as well as harmful bacteria. You may be doing lots of other kinds of damage. In fact, the side effects from the various drugs that are on the market are notorious. And doctors, of course, are worried about them as much as anyone else. But they don't know how to strengthen the organism, and so the only approach they know is to destroy the enemy. Well, the obviously better way, and the way that we're going to be coming into as this understanding grows, is strengthen the organism, strengthen the flow of energy, make yourself immune. And you will find, too, that the more positive your thoughts, the more, when I say will, I mean that tendency of the mind to say yes to life. Not just one kind of willpower exerted at a particular moment, this is certainly good, but rather that general willpower that says I will, not I won't. I can, not I can't. You will see that if you can reach that point where you have, where everything you see, you don't think what's wrong with it, but what's right. You know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. The optimist says that the glass is half full, and the pessimist says that the glass is half empty. You must learn to try to see everything in a way that makes you look for the positive side. Look for the lessons that you can learn. Look for the silver lining, whatever. And this is a part then of that whole principle of willpower. Learning to put all your will into it, but without tension. You don't have to say, you don't have to be tense if you're saying what a beautiful day it is, do you? All your energy soars that way. The reason for your tension is that half the energy is trying to say no. So try to work on that no-saying principle. This is the other side of will. Learn to be willing, and that means to learn to get rid of those things that block that flow. Learn to get rid of those thoughts in your mind that I can't do it, or it's difficult, or it's foreign to me, or if you're trying to heal somebody, then see that person as well. If you can see that person as very well, I mean completely as well, then you will find that your influence to heal is enormous. Always look in a positive way. This is the way spiritual healing should be, that you don't treat the disease, you don't try to kill the disease, you try to strengthen the soul. You try to strengthen that inner entity that couldn't possibly ever be unwell, because it's a part of God. And if you can get that soul to manifest itself, then suddenly you will have healed that person. In fact, here's a way to do it that would help you a lot. If you're interested in healing people, try to work from their center and stimulate that person to be a healer. That's the highest kind of healing of all. That's what Master used to emphasize, was that it takes two. It takes the healer and it takes the faith in the person being healed. Faith means, essentially, in this case, the getting a hold of. See, when Master used the word faith, it wasn't belief. He drew a clear distinction between those two. Belief was like the scientist's hypothesis. It makes sense, but I still have to prove it. Faith is born of proof. Faith is born of actual experience. So to believe in the healer isn't the same thing as faith. To have faith in something, in this case, to have faith in the healing process, means to be attuned to that healing process, to feel the healing power coming in, and then start dwelling on that healing power and strengthening it, making it, augmenting it to the point where it can do its work well. That kind of faith requires an awareness of what's actually happening, and then getting in tune with that awareness, and then in that attunement you will find that you do in fact have the ability to become healed. And there's no way of saying that this person was the healer. You've got to do it too, or whatever healing will be done will be temporary or will be imperfect. This is why healing by hypnosis is not the way. Because hypnosis can indeed implant in your mind the thought that I don't want to smoke anymore, for example. And so you may give up smoking, but you may then take up drinking. Because you haven't overcome, in the sense of having reached that point of wisdom in yourself, where you understand that you don't want anything to affect your own freedom. When you make a decision from yourself, there's a victory. When a decision is placed upon you, then you may seem to be doing better because you weren't doing those things, but you're just looking for the next opportunity to slip again. Because you haven't learned your lesson. You've just had this block in your mind, placed in your mind, where you can't go in that direction anymore. So all healing has to come with awareness, has to come from within. And if it's from your center to the other person's center, that's a very important aspect of helping people in the highest way. It's also a way of getting clear of that greatest temptation of ego that people who accomplish things face. Healers, perhaps in some ways more than others. It's a temptation that will cause you to fall. And that's an important point to consider. You start thinking you're good at something, and pretty soon you've got to start the climb up the ladder all over again. Ego is the thing, finally, that you need to overcome. In that thought, I would say, too, that it might be helpful to not think too much about healing yourself, because you don't want to emphasize your own ego too much. I'll tell you a story, an interesting story, that happened to me years ago. I got a case of kidney stones, and the attack was so severe that my body was shaking like a leaf. I couldn't speak. It was just incredibly painful. Women who have had kidney stones and had children have said that having kidney stones is more painful. The pain lasted about, I'd say, an hour and 45 minutes or an hour and a half. And I didn't want to pray for myself because I thought, well, God has better things to do than to worry about me. I just didn't want to bother God, was the way I put it. But basically, I just don't like to ask things for myself, because my real and much more important motive is not to feel well physically or to succeed at this thing or that thing physically. My ulterior motive in everything that I'm doing is to try to get out of this mess, this delusion of a world, and to realize my oneness with God. And anything that increases my sense of ego is going to be undermining that greater purpose. So I thought, well, it's more important not to get into this thought of me, and so I won't pray for myself. And then it was Sunday morning, and I had the service to give. And it came to about 11:15, and suddenly I realized that I was supposed to give the service and wasn't even in any shape to be asking anybody else to give it. So I just thought, well, I said to God, God, if you want me to give the service, then heal me. It was because I wanted to serve Him. If He wanted it, in that case, then it was okay. For another purpose, in other words. And it was amazing to me that in that very thought, the pain just went away like that. By the time I'd finished saying the prayer, it was gone. And it was replaced by this intense joy. It was really quite funny, because first I was in such pain I couldn't speak and couldn't give the service, but afterwards I was in such joy I couldn't give the service. And so I was sitting there trying to talk, and just tears of joy were streaming down my cheeks. And it wasn't the joy that you feel when you feel relief. It was a great divine blessing. And I felt too that the blessing had come because I wouldn't pray for myself. I think that if you are on the path, and if you want to, ultimately, if you want to reach freedom spiritually, rather than just have a body and an ego that can do great things and is very athletic and so on. This is so temporary, what you've got here. You're going to live for a few years and it'll be gone. What's the use of just a glowing body or a clever mind? The important thing is the soul. And if you see things that way, then I think you will be able to do the best things for other people and also the best things for yourself. That then you will be able, well, let me use this other illustration. When I was in Egypt, in Europe, a year ago, it was an interesting thought as I visited the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam to realize that this man who had produced such wonderful works of art had gone insane. And then to consider how many of the great artists of the 19th century went insane. And then suddenly to realize that it was the 19th century and it didn't happen before then. And why? In other words, we have Schumann and Hugo Wolf and Nietzsche and Van Gogh and all these, so many others, to the point where people nowadays say that genius and madness are very close. But before the 19th century, it wasn't happening. You didn't see it among the Bach and Handel and Brahms. Brahms came into the 19th century, but Mozart and those people, you didn't see it among the Renaissance painters. You didn't see it among the great writers in France in the 17th century. You look through history, there must have been madness here and there as a normal human phenomenon, but it didn't become a phenomenon of genius until after the Industrial Revolution. People began thinking of art and genius in a new way. Not the offering of genius into the flow of inspiration, but the offering of the flow of inspiration into the person, into the ego, where the artist was so precious and different because he was not just another cog in a machine in a great factory system, that he had this sensitive soul that made him enjoy nature in a way that most people couldn't. And there was this constant emphasis on the ego of the artist, the ego of the genius, the personality of the rare and beautiful being. And suddenly you find them going crazy because they had a lot of energy. That's what made them geniuses. But they were pouring that inspiration into the ego and increasing the ego out of bounds till they lost all sense of proportion. Before that, when people offered the ego, offered the thought of, this is what I want to do, into the flow, then they didn't seem to have that problem. Now, as people who try to accomplish anything, healing or any other work that you wish to do, if you will keep that thought in mind, that you must get out of the picture, you will be able to draw up to a certain point. You will be able to draw great energy by willpower, even if you say, I am doing it. And in fact, there has to be some thought of I, or it won't happen at all. But that thought of I has to be offered into the greater flow. To put it in a physiological way, in the teachings of Yogananda, he explained that the ego is centered in the medulla oblongata at the base of the brain. And that's why when people are very egotistical, they have their heads up like this and look down their noses, as we put it. The reason is that there's tension in the back, because there's a gathering of energy there. That tension draws the head back. And enlightenment, a worldly person, all that he does radiates outward from this center. And you'll notice if you feel flattered or pleased with yourself, or in any way your ego has been exaggerated, it could be in a negative way too, that somebody insults you and you get angry about it. You will notice that always your feeling gets stronger here, and your anger or pleasure or whatever it is radiates outward from that point. Well, you always function from that level, but sometimes that level becomes more a gathering place for the tribes, you might say, all the energy there. A master's energy is here at the point between the eyebrows, and everything he does radiates outward from this point. And in works of Indian art, you will find masters depicted often with a half moon on the forehead, indicating that the lunar energy, which is epitomized here, vibrates with the medulla, has been brought to a level of enlightenment here. Now that doesn't mean that the ego ceases to exist. It simply means that the flow of energy goes past the medulla and into the spiritual eye, and that's what gives you enlightenment. Ego is not bad. What makes ego bad is if it blocks the flow and says, stay here, I don't want the energy to go any further. I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who deserves the credit. I want the glory. If you say, no, it's not mine, and you just let the energy go on, then that thought of, I want to help, is not bad. In fact, you have to have some of that thought, as I said. So, offer the flow of what you're doing. Give up that thought of I and say, God is the doer. God is doing this through me, and yet, yes, he needs an instrument. Electricity is everywhere, but you have to have a bulb for it to shine. So you are that bulb for the divine energy. And you need to make that bulb shine, but you need not and must not take that credit or get puffed up over it. As soon as you do that, then you will close the gate, and the energy will gradually stop flowing, and you will have a fall, spiritually speaking. You don't have to. You can use anything that you do as a stepping stone to something more. And that something more, when you're on the spiritual path, needs to be understood in the final analysis to be that we want to become instruments of the divine. We want to understand that God is the real doer of everything. It's his dream. This whole world is his dream. And we need to try to just help to make him manifest in this world as he wills. And that means that whenever you're trying to do anything, you must try to attune to that level of reality that is operating in this particular case. In other words, if you want to be an artist, then you have to tune to that ray of divine consciousness that produces art, that filter in the human consciousness that produces art. You have to attune yourself to what it is to thread a needle, or to play football, or to paint a great painting, or to heal. Attune yourself to whatever it is that's working. When you want to heal, there are two things that work. One is that you yourself, as an instrument, will be using that energy that could be used to paint a great painting, perhaps. You will be using that energy through your spiritual eye to send it to other people. You will be using that energy through your hands to send energy to people. However it is that you're doing it, you will be the instrument for that, and you will direct it in a particular channel. In other words, a painter will see things. The energy will go through the eyes. A musician will hear things. That energy will be focused in the ears. A healer will be focused on the hands and on the spiritual eye and trying to send that energy in that way. But that's only the part of it. The other part is to attune yourself to that flow of inspiration that is, it's a particular vibration of the infinite consciousness that thinks in terms of healing as opposed to thinking in terms of artistic beauty or making a success of business or giving you a strong body so you can run fast. Each one of these has a sort of cosmic prototype, which if you tune into, you'll be able to succeed in ways that will be amazing to you.